All right, believe we are running live at this point. I think we are. Well, I'm going to assume we're running live at this point, and I'm going to start out with the motto of quarantine, the thing that we have all learned to say before we say anything else. Can you see me? Can you hear me? Knock if you can hear me. So I hope everybody can. In any case, I am Kate Quinn. I am the author of The Alice Network, The Huntress, and coming up, The Rose Code, releasing in March. And I am here to talk to Marie Benedict about her upcoming release. Now, she's still on mute, so I'm hoping they're not going to require me to do all of the gushing about her book. But if I need to gush about her book by myself for half an hour, I can certainly do this. But in any case, Marie is the author of The Only Woman in the Room, The Other Einstein, Carnegie's Maid, and most recently, the instant New York Times bestseller, The Mystery of Mrs Christie. So this is, I'm so happy for Marie that she got this that this book hit the list immediately. But I am absolutely thrilled to be here and talking about it today. And Marie, since you're on mute, or are you unmuted now?
I think I'm unmuted. Can you hear me?
Yes,
I can. I'm so excited.
Otherwise, I'm going to be like pulling the Ouija board down and
we could hold up messages.
Hold up messages.
This is exactly what people signed up for, right? I love it. Thank you so much for coming to chat with me today. You're the best.
Oh, not at all. I'm not going to promise that a dog is not going to interrupt us at some point, but everybody loves dogs, and it's their office, and I just happen to be working in it. So
exactly. And I must have to say that people missed the doggy dance that happened while we were waiting to come on live, which personally I would love at any moment to just pop up for fun. So hopefully
I may decide to surprise everybody if a dog decides to dance.
I love it.
Anyway, I'd love to talk a little bit about Mrs. Christie. And would you mind if I gushed just slightly? Because I'd love
to. Okay, thank you.
Yeah, if you haven't picked up The Mystery of Mrs. Christie yet, this is a fantastic dual narrative book where you have the one, the only Agatha Christie herself, and it takes on the real central mystery, one of the real central mysteries of her life, which was a 11-day period in the 1920s when she disappeared completely. And there was the kind of media storm that we can only imagine, and everything centered in this period as she went missing around her husband, who began to act increasingly suspicious himself as the lens of public attention went down on him. So we follow her husband, Archibald Christie, as he is as questioned by the police, which is fun because we do not like this man. I have feelings about this man. And then on the other hand, you flip back in time in the other timeline to Agatha and Archie first meeting, and how did this marriage happen? How did it begin to go sour? And what exactly is the mystery behind how Agatha disappeared? So that is why—
gorgeous summary. I love that. Thank you. Better than I could do myself.
Well, I could summarize other people's books. Don't ask me to write a synopsis of one of my own, though.
It's tricky.
That's bad. In any case, I did want to remind everybody that you can leave questions in the chat section. We will be able to see them, and we will be able to work them in. We're going to talk at first a little bit just about the writing and the history and the story behind this incredible novel first, but we will have time to get to questions. So please do leave questions for us.
We would love it.
Yes, absolutely. All right, now just to start, Agatha Christie, the icon versus Agatha Christie, the woman. What did you know, if anything, about her when or before you wrote this book? I mean, did the writing and the research change any preconceptions of her? Had you even heard about her disappearance? Let's hear the story there.
So I was an Agatha Christie freak growing up, as probably a lot of people listening are. And I know, Kate, you're a big fan yourself. I mean, who isn't? I kind of gobbled up her books starting in middle school like candy, and so I was always a huge fan. And, I'm kind of on this mission to unearth historical women from the past, especially women who've made significant contributions and who are dealing really with very modern issues. And so Agatha Christie was kind of always on my list just because I'm such a huge fan of hers. But it wasn't until I kind of dipped into the research and then really went and took a deep dive into the research about her life when I was thinking about writing about her, that I really started to get a better sense of who she was, other than sort of the idea, that preconception that I have, that I think a lot of people share, the matronly, silver-haired, expert writer of novels, the perfect English lady. And yes, that was her in her later years, but she was a really different person growing up. She was gregarious and adventuresome, far more than her sort of idyllic upper class seaside English life would otherwise suggest. So it was wonderful to kind of get to see that the young and the older Agatha juxtaposed. But it was really that disappearance that you talked about, that central mystery in her life that to date really is still unsolved, that really hooked me and made me absolutely determined to come up with my own solution to this great disappearance that we really don't know what happened. Because I kind of had this sense that if I could resolve it, even if it's my own fictional resolution, right? Then I could kind of resolve some of those questions we have about how she came to be the Agatha Christie that we know today. And the more I kind of learned about her, before, during, and after this time period, the more fascinating and astonishing I really found her, and the more she bucked up against those preconceptions.
So the disappearance itself, the historical context of it, how famous was this event in its day, and what role did that play on Agatha's future? I mean, and the thing I really wonder, how do you think an event like that would evolve if we were to see it, unfolding in today's headlines?
Oh my gosh, first of all, then and now, two totally different, sort of end games. But it's hard to kind of overestimate how big of a media circus this really was. Back then they didn't have, of course, social media and 24/7, media coverage, but the equivalent of that really unfolded in those days in December of 1926 that she disappeared. I think the people of England and then the people of the world, because the story was really picked up all across the English speaking world and non-English speaking. America was on the front page of the New York Times.
We
Countless.
definitely speak English in America, so we count.
Well, that's true. Actually, good point, Kate. Non-English speaking world. It was really everywhere. And I think in part it was because people couldn't envision that this woman disappeared, right? Not just, a mystery novelist on the rise. She wasn't the Agatha Christie that we think of today. She wasn't uber successful. She was really starting to make a name for herself, but she was also a mother. She had a 7-year-old daughter. She was the wife of a World War I pilot hero. And as I mentioned, she kind of grew up in this not quite aristocratic class, but very moneyed, very comfortable. And when you kind of put all those things together, I think people were just mesmerized by the fact that she was the one who disappeared. And then, layer on to that the fact that, gosh, the circumstances of her disappearance were like torn from the pages of one of her own novels. It just seemed impossible to be true. And so I think once that idea kind of captivated a few journalists, it spread like wildfire. And within a day or two, you have hundreds of journalists camping out around their home in Surrey, England, in and around the places that she disappeared or people thought might have played a role in her disappearance. So it really became a media circus. And then the media started to play a role, I think really in some ways for the first time, in the evolution of the case and the way it was perceived. Now, take those same circumstances today. How could anybody even possibly disappear, right? We have phones that track our every movement, CCTV cameras everywhere. There would be no way she would be able to disappear in the way that she did back then. And I think we would have a better sense of what happened a lot quicker. But I kind of like that it's a mystery that was never, ever solved.
Yeah, that actually makes me think too, because Agatha never talked about this later in her life, did she?
No.
And that's another level of the mystery.
Yeah, and I think, she never, there were many interviews. She made some oblique reference to it once a couple of years after she disappeared, but she was resolute from that point forward in really never referring to it. And in fact, one of the things, and I'm going to quote you here if it's okay, but one of the things that was so mesmerizing for me personally was, I used her autobiography, which as one of my major pieces of research, it's fabulous for anybody who's an Agatha Christie fan. I highly recommend it. But right there in the middle of it is, as you like to call it, like a shadow, a place where there's no explanation for what happened. She never referred to her disappearance. Here is this media circus around her 11-day vanishing, something she never spoke about, something that surely was a pivotal event in her life, and nowhere does it appear in her autobiography, right? And I almost felt like that gap was like a little bit of an invitation for me to come in and explore what may have been. So it really is something that pulled me in the minute I really dove down into the details.
So, as far as Agatha goes, when you're looking at the kinds of ladies that you choose as book subjects, how does
Yeah,
she fit into that rubric that you usually employ when you choose a heroine? Because
right.
quite often your heroines are relatively unknown women who have made some kind of significant contribution to society, who have struggled with modern day issues. And Agatha doesn't quite fit this profile because she is, a legendary household name even today. So, how did that work out as far as how she relates to your other ladies?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. I mean, because she is iconic, I mean, the name Agatha Christie immediately conjures up these golden age of, mystery novels and the time periods that she lived. And in fact, it was really that kind of iconic status that almost made me not write this book. I felt like, should my attention really be focused on women who are entirely unknown, kind of like Mileva Einstein, Albert Einstein's first wife, in my first book of these type? But once I really dug into it, I was really curious about, as I am with all the women I write about, how they came to create this legacy, how they came to be this most incredible of women, to leave behind something that we benefit from even today. So I think that in many ways, that unknowing, that understanding of how she came to be the famous mystery writer that she is, a sense that I really felt if I could resolve her mystery from my own, fictional perspective, it would help answer that. So in that way, I felt like she wasn't unlike the other women whose legacies were unknown and who they themselves were unknown. But I also felt like Agatha was really grappling with some really modern day issues here. She was really caught in the crosshairs. She was being told on one hand that she shouldn't have a career, that her husband and her family should be her number one focus. Ambition was a dirty word. And yet there was this huge part of her that loved the process of writing, not just for the help that it could provide her family, which it did, but because that's really part of who she was and who really she needed to be. So you have this really conflict that I think a lot of modern women have between familial responsibilities and the pursuit of their ambition. And then as sort of the book evolves and as Agatha Life's life kind of evolved, you have this question of an unreliable narrator. So when you think about what how she had to kind of create a facade behind which she hid during her life, when she's kind of in an inauthentic aspect of her life, she almost had to become an unreliable narrator of her own existence. And that idea, which of course plays out in other ways that I don't want to give away too many spoilers throughout the course of the book and in these different parts of her story, I started to ask myself the question, in what way are we all unreliable narrators of our lives? We create these social media facades, we present ourselves in certain ways to the public, to other people, and we're almost narrating our existence in some ways other than actually living it. So I felt like she was really dealing with some really important modern day issues that I wanted to explore as well. And then, of course, the mystery.
And I really did think you have a great element of an unreliable narrator in The Mystery of Mrs. Christie, because there is a question you will start to ask yourself at some point, and I'm not spoiling when in the book, which is, how reliable is what you're hearing? And that is, a wonderful thing, because because Agatha herself, with stories like Who Killed Roger Ackroyd,
Exactly.
is someone who really pioneered the whole idea of an unreliable narrator. So that was a great thing to play with, and I kind of enjoy being played with as a reader. Like
I
if
hope
I'm
so.
flashed, and I really enjoyed that particular thing.
Yeah,
But
I mean, I did, she published The Murder of Roger Ackroyd right before her disappearance. And so that theme of unreliable narrator, the really masterful way in which she kind of worked with voices and masks behind which we hide, was I think, very top of mind for her during this time period. I couldn't help but think that it was. And so as I was kind of putting together these alternating viewpoints, sort of her origin story, the 11 days as told through the eyes of her husband, and then as the stories coalesce kind of towards the end, I hope that at some point people start to ask themselves, what part of this is true? Who is telling the truth? Who isn't? What little bits and pieces may or may not have been manipulated, and for what end? And then at the end, to kind of take away that question of who is the unreliable narrator here, and in which ways are we all unreliable narrators?
Now, that actually leads me to a question I wanted to ask in particular, which is her books and their interplay with her own life. Do
Yeah.
you think her own books, her novels, reflect aspects of her life? And did her mysteries influence the writing of your novel?
Oh, wow. I mean, I think in some ways this was a really unusual writing process because of that interplay. I mean, Kate, you know how we get lost in the historical research and our timelines and all of that stuff. And this book was no exception. I started out kind of building a timeline of her life, which I really didn't know much about, against kind of the historical context. And as I was doing so, I was trying to reread all the Agatha Christie novels that were written during those different time periods to see what I could tease out of her life. And I really did find a lot of aspects of who she was evolving into in those books. We don't always consciously set out to write about ourselves, but we can't help but sneak those threads in there. And just as one example, when she and Archie were in maybe in a better part of their relationship, they went on this round the world tour, which was super adventuresome, really incredible. They were promoting a big exhibition that was going to happen in England, and it was part of his job. And she wrote at least in part, this book, The Man in the Brown Suit, which is this really kind of different book for her. It's about diamond heists and this young girl witnessing a murder, but she ends up going in a lot of the places that Agatha is seeing, and she's pursuing love and a romantic relationship at the same time. And you get to see the youthful Agatha there. And it's not her best work by any stretch, but to me, it's really priceless for that window into her psyche and herself at that time period. And then as you read the books that came after, it starts to shift. And you can see the slightly more jaded woman evolve, the slightly more ambitious woman. The themes that are playing out in her own life are starting to play out in her books. And that romantic hero that appears in The Man in the Brown Suit isn't always seen in the books that come right afterwards. So it was a really interesting kind of process. And then, of course, all those things are affecting what I'm writing at the same time. So it was almost like, in a way, having a conversation with her at that time.
So what is how long did you take you to research this, and what is the standard research question? How much of this book is fact, how much is fiction? Like, the whole research.
Oh yeah, I mean, we always get that one, and it's such a great question, and it's so unanswerable at the same time. The best way I can describe it, and then I'll give a little bit more context, is I kind of look at the historical research. You've heard me say this before, Kate, as like the architecture of my story. It's the foundation, the roof, the pillars that hold it all up. And in those pillars and architectural features are dates and details and political movements and what my characters might have eaten during that time period. Anything from like a macro to a micro detail. And then anything I can find that is really original source material, things that the character wrote, like the autobiography of Agatha Christie was priceless for that. But there's always going to be things we don't know. Like, I know the date and the place where Agatha met Archie. I know from that moment forward, he really swept her off her feet. But what did he say to her on the dance floor in that first dance? I have no idea. There's no record of it. And so that's kind of, I think, an example of the way in which the fiction comes in. I've got the architecture, the date, the place. I have a sense of what the place looked like, the music that was playing. But what could he possibly have said to put the events of the upcoming years in motion? I don't know. And that's really the mix of fiction and kind of logical extrapolation of the character you've come to know over time, I hope, anyway. I feel so responsible and so towards these women, and it's such an honor really to kind of tell these parts of their lives, that I hope that they're written in, they're read in that vein as well, really as a sort of an honorarium of them during their lifetime. So I hope that kind of answers the way in which the fact and the fiction work together. In terms of how long it takes, it really varies. Like you, I'm sure, like I keep this list and I'm always kind of dabbling in the lives of these women. I feel like such a dilettante, but and so over time, I'm kind of assembling their stories, assembling information, seeing if it's the right tale, and letting the information gestate and percolate. And it's only then that I know that it's a story I think I can write. That time period is kind of incalculable. Like Agatha's been on my list probably for 5 years. I'm glad I didn't write her 4 years ago. It would have been a different story. It took that time. But when I sit down to when I finish it, I love to have a year. Whether I get that or not depends on the year.
Well, you have a lot more time for writing this year, given that
Yeah.
traveling has pretty much stopped, and going outside the house is pretty much not an option either.
No, it's really not. It's I definitely have taken advantage of the pandemic downtime. Let's put it that way. It's probably the only silver lining in this really crazy, challenging time.
It's not something to do with Agatha, but I do think it's an interesting question. What's it been like for you to be, working, writing, promoting, doing all of, this weird job that we have
Yes,
in the
very.
middle of a lockdown? I mean, because I've been curious to ask all writers this that I
Yeah.
know. And partially that's because I'm like, how are you doing it? Are you handling it better than I am? Do you have any tips?
I do
Is there a
wonder.
magic trick?
Give me your tricks, please. I'd love to hear your tricks, Kate. I feel part of me feels very lucky, to be doing a job that I hope helps people, helps people either escape from kind of what we've got going on right now or connects them. I love to talk with groups of people about a book, my book or any book that they've read. And, we're so in these isolated little pods, and books can really reach across that and bring us together and make us feel connected with people. And gosh, I've been amazed by the way that booksellers, librarians have pivoted their business and just totally changed
Oh,
how
good. I've been so impressed.
it's been unbelievable. And I mean, not to pat ourselves on the back, but the virtual events. I feel like all of us really appreciate more than ever the power and importance of books. And so we're trying to find a way to connect with readers, connect with other with writers, and connect with like-minded people. And I think that booksellers and librarians and readers have been amazing in the way that they've kind of reinvented the wheel here and come up with ways for us to continue to do that. And I feel lucky to be a part of that, and lucky that I have a job that is capable of being done really easily from home. Is there a downside? Yes, I love to be on the road actually talking to readers. I get some of my best ideas from readers. It's incredible. But I have to say, in some ways we get to reach more people virtually. You might do a library event in Indiana and it might have somebody from Vancouver on. So, I think we're all just trying to find ways to stay connected, stay reading. And if you have some great tips, Kate, I would love them because I could certainly use them.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know about you, but especially when this all first started going down, I had the attention span of a goldfish.
Oh.
So I'm sitting there, going, well, everything is flying by, and I'm just like, I can't focus anything. And I was editing the Rose Code in the middle of that. The way it goes. You have like 5 rounds of edits, which is why when you follow an author on social media, they will say, "Yay, I'm done with the book." They will post that like 8 times over a year. Like, how many times do you need to finish this book? Well, the time you finish the rough
Many.
draft, then there's your first round as you get it back from your critique partners. Then there's the round of editing after you get it back from your editor. Then there's the round of editing after you turn it in there. Then there's the round of and the copy editor and first pass pages. And that's why we post, the book is done 8 times. Now
Well, also I have to just talk a little bit about the Rose Code, if that's okay. First of all, Kate has an amazing book coming out in March. It's called The Rose Code. It is this, talk about a deep dive and talk about complicated. I don't know how you even kept track of the different women she's writing about, but it's all about Bletchley Park, that super secret code breaking hub in England during World War II that really changed the course of the war in so many different ways. But of course, Kate being Kate, she shines that light on the women who really made it happen. And you come away feeling, gosh, so indebted to them and so empowered by what they did in a time period when, women were really perceived as being pretty good at getting the coffee ready for all the code breakers. These women found a way, all different women from really different walks of life, different skill sets. And it is a puzzle worthy of Agatha Christie in there. I mean, to try and kind of tease that out as well. It's so good. And so when Kate says that, she's talking about all these rewrites, I don't even know it's such a complicated, twisty story. I don't even know how you did that, quite honestly. So 8 rounds, it would probably have taken me 15 to get that one together, and would have definitely taken up most of the pandemic for sure.
Yeah, and the trouble with trying to edit in a pandemic, I wasn't drafting, and that I was very grateful for that. But there's that thing where you're sitting there at your screen and you're trying not to doom scroll, and you're just thinking, I really don't care about deepening my heroine's emotional arc right now. And you have to make yourself care, because you owe it to the readers, and you owe it to them more than ever if they're still going to be maybe in lockdown when they're reading this. So it's like, no, I will make myself care. I will make myself edit, and also reminding yourself, as I certainly did, as you have done. I'm very lucky to have this job that I can do from home and I can do safely. And I have absolutely nothing to complain about compared to
exactly. That's how I feel too.
Always to think about. Now, I think, I've already seen a ton of questions here. So I think it would be fun to already dip into some, even if we're a few minutes early. But first of all, I think since we're talking about reading in the pandemic, and I think the importance of books in this time, what genre do you particularly like to read? And I'm looking back to see who asked that question so I can give a shout out for Mare. What genre do you most like to read?
Oh gosh. Well, I have a really kind of disturbing confession to make. First of all, I read in every genre at all different times. Although I
did Bridgerton, we're done.
Oh no, that is not my confession. My confession actually is, and I can't believe I'm going to say, but I did read a lot of dystopia during this time. I thought that I couldn't, that that would be too much. But in some ways it was like, okay, it's not that. It's not that. It was, and almost like in an apocalyptic preparedness way, I was looking at what people were doing to get ready for the next thing. That was a phase at the beginning. And then I kind of moved on to, I did a lot of historical fiction reading over the summer, a lot of mysteries. I really found myself, I obviously was rereading a lot of Agatha Christie's as part of my job. Yeah, that's a hardship right there, but a lot of newer mysteries as well. And of course I was doing a lot of reading of, we were in this really tumultuous period in our country, and I was reading a lot of really inspiring African-American authors as well. So it was really a huge smattering of things. But I had heard, I think I told you this from a bookseller, that the Agatha Christie books were like flying off the shelves, and that mysteries were really attractive to people at this time. And I definitely found myself really drawn towards them, and the unpuzzling and that sort of comforting nature of, in some ways, of those worlds. So I found myself kind of on that roller coaster, as we all were, of the pandemic itself, and finding myself attracted to certain genres at different time periods, for sure. How about you? What were you reading?
Oh, I'll read anything. I read a lot of historical fiction, but I love good sci-fi. I love a good romance, and those are certainly been comforting when you want the guarantee of a happy ending. And I think that's partially why mysteries are also comforting too, in their way. Romance guarantees a happy ending at the end. Where mystery guarantees a solved mystery, an answer. And exactly. I think both of those things are comforting in times of stress and uncertainty. So that's my guess as to why both romance and I'm sure also mystery as well, including Agatha, was flying off the shelves. But I'll read pretty much anything as long as it's well written. And I like to bounce back and forth, because you read something heavy and then you need something light to balance it. Light, after a while you need something really chewy to dig into. So I read almost anything, and I will bounce around happily to do so.
Yeah.
Now for another question, have you ever watched the movie Agatha and the Truth of Murder? And this comes from I think it's Joanne.
Well, I have to say I have watched it. I watched it after I wrote The Mystery of Mrs Christie. So for those of you who aren't familiar with what it is it's a Netflix movie. It came out maybe 2 years ago, I want to say, I'm not sure, it's maybe a year ago. And it takes her disappearance, a very different look at her 11-day disappearance. It posits that she solves a mystery during that time, that she herself becomes a detective and solves an old mystery. And it's probably not as far-fetched as it sounds. One like little interesting nugget about Agatha's own 11-day disappearance is that two famous mystery writers were consulted during that time period to see if they could help solve the question of her whereabouts. The authorities got in touch with Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who wrote the Sherlock Holmes mysteries, to see if they could find her. See if he could find her. And instead of really like sleuthing the scene, like I think they thought he was going to, he took one of her gloves. He was a spiritualist at this time, and he gave it to a psychic to see if the psychic could find out where Agatha had disappeared to. Now, I think the authorities were very disappointed with that outcome because, of course, it shed no light and it wasn't exactly methodical. And the wonderful, often I think overlooked mystery writer Dorothy Sayers, who I love, another golden age of mystery writer during the time period of Agatha. She was called into the scene to see if she could shed any light. So the idea in this movie of Agatha being consulted about a murder mystery really isn't that far-fetched. That the authorities were doing it during that time period. And it is a totally different look at what might have happened to her during her disappearance. And I have to say, I enjoyed it. It's very, very different from what I did, which is really to take a really hard look at her life. Not from birth, but from a really, those early young adulthood years, and kind of see what brought her potentially to the disappearance. I had this sense that someone this smart and canny could not possibly be a victim in her own vanishing, without giving too much of a spoiler. But that kind of notion played with what I thought of might have happened to her. But definitely the author of that particular movie had a very different perspective on it. So that's a great question, because it's another look at an unknown period of time.
And that's the fun thing about a historical mystery, is you could have so many versions, and who knows what's right. The only person who's ever going to know is Agatha, and she ain't ever telling.
Oh, that ship has sailed. She is never going to share what actually happened. And I think even her own family knew better than to ask her. There was an interview, I think, with her grandson, who's been really, really kept alive the flame of her work and her all of her files and journals and all those things. And he said that growing up, he knew he knew about it, but he knew it was something that you didn't ask your grandmother about that. And I think that was pretty well known across the board.
So I have another question from Sharon, and that is, what years of Agatha's life does this novel deal with? And would you consider continuing her story in another novel?
Well, isn't that an intriguing little in question? So two things. I'll take that in two parts. The book really focuses on 1926, December of 1926 in particular. That's when she disappeared. That's when the storylines coalesce, and we kind of come up with my vision of what happened during that time period. But we start out earlier, because we start out before World War I. We start out when she and Archie first meet, 1912. And that really traces Agatha through this really interesting period of time in her life, really captures that, I don't want to say devil may care, but much more daring young woman that she was. She signed up to be a nurse. She volunteered to be a nurse during World War I, which was really not that common, especially for girls of her class. She found that rather than fainting from the sight of blood like all of her friends, she actually loved to kind of watch these surgeries and help the soldiers who were returning home in pretty bad shape. And then when she, shifted gear and became a pharmacist assistant, which was really quite arduous from an educational perspective. I mean, they didn't have like pills like we have today. You were literally mixing the different substances. And that's really where she developed her facile understanding of poison, which obviously came in handy for the rest of her life. You have a woman who's out there really embracing life, and tracing her from that period to that passionate love that she felt for her husband, to early motherhood and early years of her marriage, and really dealing with her husband, who was very changed coming home from the war. They didn't talk about PTSD back then, but I can't help but think that these pilots, he was one of the very first pilots in World War I, and gosh, the conditions were so dangerous. So few of them returned. I can't, he returned very different, but alive. I can't help but think that she was really in the grips of that as well. So it's a lot of really textured issues that you're really learning about her as you kind of understand the person she is. Now, she was different on the other side of this. She was very different. She really had grabbed a hold of certain ambitions and certain authentic aspects of her life, but she had to make sacrifices along the way. Sort of society demanded it. And on the other side of this disappearance, I don't think she or anyone else ever dreamed it would become the media frenzy that it did. I don't think that was anyone's, if you had your Ouija board out, you weren't going to get a big yes on that, right? So I think that really shaped who she was on the other side. And yeah, I absolutely would love to dig into who she was on the other side of this disappearance, not just the famous mystery writer, the one that we all think of, but also the person she was quietly beneath the surface, watching, gathering information, really still wanting to act, although that a little bit of her gregariousness had to be kind of suppressed. So absolutely, I'd love to dig into that.
So we have a question from Ben, and that is it's a question for both of us. And it's a question of what inspires you, which I think is a fun one. That's always good.
Yeah, I'd love to hear what you say, Kate. What inspires you? I'd love to know.
Well, every book is a little different as far as what the themes are. And I always tend to think that themes tend to sort of rise up out of the book as I'm writing. And often I don't realize that my subconscious has been tap dancing all over the manuscript and trying to work out issues, until I look at it later and I'm like, oh, so that's what it was trying to say.
Right.
Every book is different, yet at the same time, there is a question of like what inspires you, because any writer, as far as where our ideas come from, we look for those light bulb flashes of something that'll hook us and make us think that's a hook I can hang a story on. But the thing is, you show each of us 100 writers, 100 different prompts, will each be drawn to a different one, will each be inspired by a different one. So It is a very different thing, inspiration. But I will say, I think it's something that crystallized for me around the time I wrote the Alice Network. And then I was looking for what to write next. And I wrote The Huntress, is that I am really inspired to find women of the past who have maybe not had as much of the spotlight as they deserve, or they have fallen out of the spotlight, and do at least my small part to shine that light back on them and be inspired by their courage, their bravery, women who are doing extraordinary things in eras often when we don't think of women doing extraordinary things. And I want to do my part to shine on that. And those are the women I look for. And those are the hooks where I want to hang stories.
I love that. I absolutely love that. Yeah. I mean, I think, we're in such really wonderful position to do that. And there's so many of these women. They're literally just out there in plain sight, hiding in plain sight, waiting for us to find them, I feel like. And I feel the same way. I often feel like, you put it so well when I said you find them in the shadows and the cracks, a place where you would expect to hear a woman's voice, to hear another perspective. And yet it's like crickets, and that those women are out there, that their contributions, their voices, their lives are there, and they were hugely important in what eventually occurred. And yet they're not being told. Their stories are not being told. So absolutely, it's such an honor, really, I feel like, to tell the stories. And for me, it's, I find them everywhere. I mean, I'm not nobody's scientist. I have two sons who love science, but there's so many unsung women in science, and I find myself drawn to their discoveries. They're literally just everywhere, in every subject, every era, ancient, modern, you name it. And like you, I really feel like when I sense they're hiding there in the shadows, that's what inspires me, is to draw them out, to bring them out, and let everybody else see them too.
Well, this leads right into Carolyn's question, which is, do you have a list of women you want to write about, and how do you decide?
Oh, yeah.
I have a list too. I have a whole
You keep a list too?
I have a file just called the Plot Possibilities file.
I love that.
where I dump sentence fragments of like, write a book about a Paris hotel in after World War One, or something like that, or write a book about, Cecilia Payne, who discovered hydrogen, or, it'll be a one sentence fragment. And then if it starts to work in my mind and get or gather momentum, that's when I'm like, maybe it's time to look at this for what might come next. But how do you do it?
Well, I do the same thing, but do you also keep, like, if there's like a little newspaper article that you saw it, keep it in the plot file? Yeah. So I have like a literal file, like I have one on my computer, and I have a literal file as well, in which there's like articles in which there's no mention of a woman, right? But I know she's there, and I know the time period is fascinating, and I know I've got to find her in there, right? That there's something, you just feel it. So I have everything from, literally like ancient Greece to 50 years ago, newspaper articles, little references, menus. Don't even ask about that one, but you name it, it's in there. And it operates very much the same way, Kate. Like, I start to feel attracted to that story. And so then I dig a little deeper, and then I can start to, when the story kind of starts to, I can start to hear her voice in my head. That's when I know that's the one.
Then you look up and it's 3 a.m.
Well, that does happen a lot. I will say I've gone down the rabbit hole so far, I don't even know how to like get out of it anymore. Right. And all the little tidbits I found along the way. But that's one of the best parts, is on the hunt of the story, on the hunt of the right woman, on the hunt of what she might share with all of us. Like, that is one of the most exciting parts of it. And the research part of it it's more than half the fun. I love that. Absolutely love it.
Well, there's a good question from Stella, which is, when it comes to the research, how do you get to the heart and the mind of the person? Not just because there's the research of what they do and what's the events, but how do you get to the heart and the mind of the person?
Well, I'm sure you have your little techniques and tricks and stuff too, Kate. Like for me, a lot of it is about that original source material. Like if I can find letters that my character has read, the woman has written, or like in the case of Agatha Christie, an autobiography, but also at the time I bought my autobiography ages ago, they probably don't even do this anymore, but there was a CD in which she narrated part of it, read it aloud. And I was like, oh my God, like her musing on her idyllic youth in seaside Devon it's like magical, and then she's in your head, and I can start to think and hear and feel the things that she might have. It's like simultaneously putting on headphones and a set of glasses, right? That you can kind of see and hear through her lens and in her way. But for me, it very often is original source material, or like in the case of Hedy Lamarr, to watch her movies and see how she moved and talked. And that was a unique experience. Mileva Marish Einstein, I had tons of her letters, and those letters were, you really could see what kind of phrases she used, what she thought about, what was, really stuck in her mind, what she considered. Those kind of things help get there. How about you? Is it that sort of thing? Or are you just all imagination and you're like a wizard?
If you can find a voice, then that's really good. Like if you have letters, if you have an account, if you have what people said about them, these are the things that might help you, get to know someone. I also tend to run a set of exercises too with characters, whether they're fictional or whether they're historical in some way, where you start asking yourself, what are some things that round them out? And these are things like, what are their strengths? What are their talents? Whether it's something like I can crack a safe, or whether I just mix a really great cocktail, or whether, and then you ask yourself, what are their weaknesses? And not just like, well, like at a job interview, I work too hard.
Oh,
no, it's
right.
like,
Yeah.
do you have a temper? Do you have are you inclined to lie to people? Are you a doormat? Are you inclined to, to blow up? What are the weaknesses? And then you find, like, what is a wound that you have? Is there something that, hurts from your childhood? What is your ambition? What do you want the most? And then, you start digging into things that conflict, like because, people, maybe what they want is one thing, but what they need is something different. And maybe they're even opposites, like what you want is, well, I don't need anybody. I don't need love. I don't need companionship. Maybe that's actually what you need. And you're just denying it to yourself.
Right.
So I go through questions like this to ask about, try to get into the depth of somebody and figure out who they are, so I know how to write about them.
I
And that
love
actually
that.
comes from a great bit from Christine, which is, was there something about Agatha's personality you uncovered that shocked you? That
Ooh.
seems like it might be a fun one.
Well, it's some of the more shocking stuff were from those youthful periods, when she was just seizing the day left and right. And I think there were two things about that round the world tour that I mentioned before that, I really found her a little bit of Agatha in from that tour in The Man in the Brown Suit. They traveled literally around the world. And to do so, to join her husband on that trip, she had to leave her 1-year-old daughter behind with her mother for 18 months. So that was very interesting. And surprising, right? And then on the other side of it, you see her on this trip, and she is becoming the very first Western woman to surf. So you see these really different aspects of her personality kind of all at once. And you see a woman who's not afraid to try something that no one she knows has ever tried, something dangerous, something where she has to wear a bathing suit. There are so many things about that are surprising and astonishing for that time period, and also very telling about who she is, who she was, and the kind of conflicts she's having and the ways she's resolving them. But I have some pictures, which I don't have the rights to publish, but I absolutely love, of Agatha on a surfboard. And it's not two things thought I would ever put together. Agatha Christie on a surfboard, but they're awesome.
Now, there's a good question from Caroline, which is, what lessons or musings about human nature do you think come out and are prevalent in Agatha's mysteries? Like, does she have like a view of human nature, you think, that, we can get from the things that she writes?
I think she has a tremendous belief in our intellectual capabilities. Absolutely. And I think that definitely comes out in the book. She utilizes every aspect of her intellectual powers in this book to achieve a resolution that I don't think she could have otherwise done. And it kept in sort of the societal box that she was in. But I think if there's anything to be the lesson or derived from it, is the sense that at many junctures in our lives, we're going to be faced with the question of whether we want to follow societal dictates or pursue an authentic path. And Agatha had to go to great lengths to pursue that authentic path. And I'm happy she did, because it gave us the Agatha Christie that we know and the legacy she left behind. But it takes a tremendous amount of strength and tenacity to do that against the general societal sort of inclination. And I think if there's anything, I feel myself, I'm always kind of asking myself that question. She chose to pursue that authentic path. And if people read it and kind of see it in that way and see, it's a quandary that many women were in historically and in modern times, but men as well, and how important it is to follow that authentic path. If Agatha had not chosen to do that, we would not have her legacy. It would have gone on the wayside, by the wayside. And she made that sacrifice, took those risks, and came out on the other side of it, the Agatha Christie of legend.
Now, I think this is something we both always have fun doing, especially as we're coming toward the end of a discussion. But are you going to continue to write historical novels? And this is a question from Abby.
Oh, yeah.
And what are you working on now?
Wow. Well, I just don't see an end in sight. Like you, Kate, my list is so long, and I feel bad leaving any of those women behind. They're all so deserving of having really that second chance at a life, at having their legacy known. I don't have any intention of leaving their stories behind anytime soon. The pandemic has been amazing. I've written a lot of books during the pandemic in 18 months. I think I've written probably 5 different projects. But I just finished a book that will come out next January about Rosalind Franklin. For those of you who aren't familiar with her, she was an incredible 1940s and 50s scientist. She labored to come up with discover the double helix structure of DNA. And her colleagues, it's a crazy suspenseful novel, although it's not going to sound like it. Her colleagues accessed that information without her knowledge and permission, and won the Nobel Prize for that structure. Two gentlemen you may know better as Watson and Crick. So it's really an incredible look at a brilliant and another tenacious woman, and a lesson that we all need to know, I think, a history lesson. And I have, I think, a really powerful co-written book coming out in June called The Personal Librarian. I wrote with Victoria Christopher Murray. It's the story of J.P. Morgan's personal librarian, who became one of the most powerful women in the art world during her lifetime. She ran the Morgan Library in New York City, and she was only able to do so by hiding her true identity as an African-American woman. She was fair enough to pass as white. So it's a look at another astonishing woman, but also a period of time in American history when it was, when really segregation and racism rose up at the promise of equality and the sacrifice that one woman had to make in that historical world.
Well, I can't wait to see that. And I'm also concluding too that, like, you're that 1% of the population that managed to be really productive in quarantine, which I am very I finished editing one book and then I managed to begin another one, and that was it.
I think I'd like to say, though, that it was all about just denial. Do you know what I mean? It was my way of escaping from what was happening. It was my little, instead of sometimes digging into a novel, I'd dig into the research. It might have been a coping mechanism during a really challenging time. I don't know. But
something to the escapism aspect, because I've been kind of doing that myself. Once I started a new book, it's like, it is rolling out like nobody's business. I mean, and I am, as far as what I'm working on next, I have The Rose Code coming out March 9th, which is about the women code breakers of Bletchley Park. And the one
good. It's so good. I love it.
Oh, thank you. And the one I have after that, I'm working on a story about Lyudmila Pavlichenko, who was the most deadly female sniper of all time, who fought against Hitler on the Russian front. And I'm writing about her, and it's like, you wouldn't believe how happy I am every day to escape into her world. And then I stop and like, you are that happy to go to the Russian front every day? What is wrong with you? What does that say about the world we're currently?
The world we live in. Oh.
It's like, yes, the Russian front, here I come.
Snipers. Oh, well, I can't wait to read that one. I've only heard little tidbits from you, but she sounded absolutely amazing. There was incredible. And she has an autobiography or a journal or something too, doesn't she?
Yes, she wrote her memoirs. And one of the great things about, which I think you experienced with Agatha, is that people might think, oh, having a memoir or an autobiography will make the research so easy because you have everything you need right there, right? From the horse's mouth. No, because for one thing, when people write an autobiography, it's not a diary. It's still for public. There's still things they leave out. Another thing, people lie. They lie even to themselves, or they remember things differently. And there are just things that are so painful they don't want to talk about.
Yeah.
And seeing those shadows and thinking, why is there this big gap here where you're not talking about your first husband? Or why is there, an 11-day gap when you went missing and there was a countrywide manhunt? And you just didn't cover that. These are the wonderful things about history, where even in an autobiography or a memoir or a diary, you do not have all the answers. You will never have all the answers.
Never. And that's also part of the fun, is for us to go into those unanswerable areas and come up with what we think happened.
So I think we're almost done here. I'm not seeing the cutting us off thing. We could probably just keep going forever.
Forever.
Real quick, just to finish, because it's fun. It's this question from John. Have you ever been tempted to disappear as Agatha did?
Oh my. I think we've all felt that way, especially during the pandemic. I have to confess that I spend a lot of time when I really need a break on, like hotel websites and exploring different island locations like the Maldives. And yeah, for sure. Right about now, I'd love to be on an over-the-water bungalow in the Maldives, but I'm realistic. I'm happy to be right here today. I think definitely the pandemic has made a lot of us want to escape for 11 days, for sure.
And that's what books are.
That's exactly what we're providing here today, Kate, an escape.
So there was a question earlier on about whether anyone could buy autographed copies of Marie's books, and I'm not sure if that might have to be a question you leave to the Barnes and Noble folks, or Marie, do you have an answer for that?
All I can say is I'm sure we can arrange that.
All right, I'm sure we can.
And we will let you know.
I want to, say in general, just in conclusion, please remember you can buy copies of Marie's books, any of her books, as well as the Mystery of Mrs. Christie at Barnes and Noble. You can order through them and they will be happy also, I'm sure, to help facilitate an autograph or an autograph.
Oh, yes. Always happy.
I'll pre-order mine. The rose card is March 9th. So please pre-order and, pre-order like 8 copies for all your friends and relatives and all this birthday.
You can connect all together during the pandemic, right? I mean, talking about the Rose Code, there's so much to delve into, and you will be so just blown away by the work that was undertaken at Bletchley Park and the work that these women did, whether it's as code breakers or spies. I mean, it really was the most incredible secret during World War II. And of course, they were cracking all the codes. I mean, it's just a wonderful, wonderful book. And you got to pre-order that March 9th.
All right. So I think we just want to give everybody a huge thank you for tuning in and listening to us yatter for the last hour.
Yeah, it's been so much fun.
We do hope you will have a chance to pick up these books and disappear for a little while yourself, just as Agatha did.
Exactly. And I want to say thank you to Kate Quinn, the magnificent author, for joining me today, asking questions, chatting with me. And I want to say a huge shout out to Barnes and Noble for inviting us to come and talk to you all today. Visit your Barnes and Nobles. Our booksellers are such important parts of our communities. And books are the best way to keep us connected and maybe sane during this really challenging time.
Amen. Nothing more to say than that, I think. Just have a lovely evening, a lovely afternoon, and we hope you'll catch you at some other event.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thanks, Kate.
Thank you.